I like the part where you clap for me coming up like I do anything except say exactly these words. That is Sharon. Sharon is a person. That person will say words. That's actually the worst intro ever. I have a little bit better one for Sharon Steed, which is why I was excited to give it. That I met Sharon first. Jim, are you here at Madison Ruby? Jim is maybe in the audience, maybe not. Jim Remzig, who's here at the conference, ran a conference called Madison Ruby, and for many years, very successful and popular conference, and this was very early in my software career, and I went and I saw Sharon speak and was very, very impressed by the content. And I remember having a conversation with you at the time, either then or later when we invited you to speak at another conference at Open Source Bridge in Portland about your career and trying to decide how to turn this skill, this empathy that you have that is amazing, and everyone who meets you can't help but talk about you, that you just kind of see through people, into a career, right? And you have done exactly that. You're an incredibly impressive person, and I'm very proud to know you. So please, a round of applause for Sharon Steed.
When's the last time you felt vulnerable at work? Well, I feel vulnerable all the time because I am a person who stutters. I have always felt a little bit concerned and a little bit intimidated by times when I have to talk to people because I never know how the words are going to come out of my mouth. I never know if I'm going to be fluent. Which I am occasionally, but a lot of the times I'm not. And I never know if people are going to feel uncomfortable every time they hear me talk. I don't know how they're going to react. And I don't know if I'm just gonna fall back on old habits like changing words or just avoiding conversations entirely. However, even though stuttering has been a very difficult part of my experience, it's also taught me something incredibly valuable, and that's that my vulnerability is actually a great way to help build relationships, sincere, good relationships with other people. And that's because we all have some sort of insecurities. We all have some sort of vulnerability. And if vulnerability is the tie that binds us, then empathy is going to be the thread that connects us. It's in that consistent pursuit of vulnerability, of understanding other people, that they feel a lot more comfortable and confident talking about their own vulnerabilities and their own insecurities. And if people feel safe, they feel included. So as we continue to pursue this, vulnerability, it's in that pursuit. It's in that, trying to make people feel safe and trying to make people feel included that we are able to make empathy actionable. Hello, my name is Sharon Steed. I am a keynote speaker and empathy consultant, and I'm a person who stutters. I'm going to talk a lot more about this stuttering aspect as we go on in the talk, but first I'm going to talk a little bit about just my background and my career. I've been a speaker for almost 10 years now. I did my first talk at Madison Ruby, which is coming back in 2024, and it's so incredibly exciting. I know, yay! I have a couple of courses available on LinkedIn. One of them is called Driving Inclusion with Empathy, and the other one is called Communicating with Empathy. Both of them have been incredibly popular, which is really, really cool to know that a lot of people all over the world are as passionate and curious about, truly engaging empathy and being better communicators and being more inclusive. I have worked with a lot of companies and spoken at a lot of conferences over the years. I think I've spoken on like 5 continents and like 20 countries or something absolutely insane. And I like to tell people this because, I really want people to know that this is something that is so valuable to people from all walks of life, right? Everybody sees the value, everybody sees the importance of, having empathy. However, it is kind of a tricky thing to really identify, and it's a hard thing to do. So that is what I'm here to talk about today. That is making empathy actionable. So in order to, define empathy on our own terms and to turn it into a more action-based thing, we first have to talk about, why empathy is important. So the first reason is that empathy is gonna, drive companies' bottom lines. And that's because it's really gonna build a lot of trust. And trust is gonna impact how your teams communicate, collaborate, innovate, and solve problems. Companies with a high employee engagement experience 23% higher profitability. That is a lot of more money that your companies can make. And that, kind of goes back to, teams just being a lot more productive if they can work better together. But the problem here is that according to Gallup, only 21% of US employees agree that, they trust the leadership in their organization. So if there is no empathy, your company is going to be less profitable. If there is no trust, there is no empathy. Empathy is going to increase employee engagement. Engaged employees are going to be satisfied, productive employees, right? So companies with a low employee engagement experience 43% higher turnover. I talk a lot to HR groups, HR organizations, and a thing that they, discuss a lot is how expensive it is to constantly, hire employees. But then also, it takes a lot of time, right? I think from the time one employee leaves to when you have another one in their seat and being productive, I think the average amount of time is something like 9 months, right? So if we have a little bit more empathy as a company, you aren't going to be experiencing those kinds of problems, right? You are going to have engaged employees, and engaged employees are going to stick around. And, to that end, empathy is going to, keep employee retention rates, incredibly high. So I like this stat because I think it goes to show, one, how confident a lot of employees are in their abilities and how much power they feel like they have in their other ability to find other employment, right? So 80% of employees are willing to leave their current roles and they feel that they could confidently find another job. So employees are going to want to stay at your company, or if you're a manager, they're going to want to stay on your team if you show them a little bit more empathy. The problem, though, is that, it's kind of difficult to really define what empathy is, and if we can't define empathy, then we aren't going to be able to truly engage in these empathy behaviors. So let's talk about what empathy really is. The dictionary definition is the ability to understand and share the feelings of another person. Now, I think that that definition is perfectly fine, but the problem is that it doesn't tell you the how, right? And that's because empathy as a noun is an idea. It is intangible. It doesn't really have any meaning until you give it some sort of definition that's going to work for you in your own personal experience. And so for me, as a person who stutters, I had to learn what empathy was, both the hard and fast way, very, very early on in my life. So this is me. I'm around 3 years old. I know, I'm adorable. And this is around the age that I began to show some signs of having a speech impediment. But my parents weren't all that concerned because a lot of kids who are around this age either stutter or they have like a lisp. They have something about their speech that isn't quote unquote normal, right? I think something like 95% of kids have a speech impediment at around the ages of 2 or 3, but by the time they hit the ages of 5 or 6, they outgrow it and it goes away forever. Obviously, that did not happen with me. So very early on, I developed these sort of communications neuroses. I would be in conversations with people and I would constantly be thinking about, the words that I was going to use in order to get my point across and be as fluent as possible, right? So I would change words in my head. I would use a lot of filler words like ums and ahs and knows and likes and all of that stuff. And I eventually came to a point where I was just not going to talk about topics where I knew that I was going to have a really hard time being fluent. So anytime I had to talk about myself, I was incredibly demure. I was shy. It probably came off as smug. And I never meant that, of course, but it was because I was just so afraid of talking. So I go through, schooling years, I go through college, I hit into my 20s, I go out into the workforce, and, I quickly realized that the only way that I'm going to be able to create the life that I really desire, the life that I want, is if I sort of overcome this fear I have of talking. Now, when you are, young, when you're in your 20s and you're going to these events like, this, and you have to, talk to people and tell them about yourself and here's what I want to do and here's the kind of work I'm in, that stuff, as you do it more, it gets a little bit more comfortable, you get a little bit more confident. I wasn't doing any of that stuff at all. I was avoiding these kinds of things because I was so afraid of how I spoke. And so I knew that I had to sort of overcome this fear. So at the time, I was seeing this speech therapist, and she said, okay, look, I can help you stutter a little bit less, but the only way that, that help is going to work is if you are comfortable with stuttering. I almost flipped over the table Teresa Real Housewives of New Jersey style. How am I supposed to be comfortable with this thing that I've been so uncomfortable with for my entire life, ever since I was very, very young? I mean, at this point I was, in my late 20s, so 25 years. How am I supposed to be so comfortable with something that has caused me so much trauma? And so, I sort of was like, well, okay, I guess I can hear you out. And so she suggested I pursue public speaking. And so the first talk I gave was to a graduate seminar at Northwestern. It was a fluency seminar in the speech and language pathology program. And so my whole, goal there was to go up, tell a few stories, and then run home as quickly as possible and hide under the covers and hope that these people never talk to me again. So I told some stories, I wanted them to understand the sort of emotional component of having this very big insecurity, this very big vulnerability. And what ended up happening was that they asked me a ton of questions. I mean, I'm talking like an hour's worth of questions, and I thought this was absolutely fascinating because I had never considered myself to be an articulate person, right? Because I had this very deep-seated insecurity, I felt that impacted my ability to be a good communicator. Does that sound familiar for anybody? And so, I gave another talk. It was an Ignite talk. And for those that aren't familiar, it's 5 minutes. I think you get like 20 slides, and they change every 15 minutes or 15 seconds, right? And so, I gave this talk, and it was also impactful. And then I spoke at Madison Ruby, and it was also impactful. And I continued to speak at these conferences. And so in the beginning, it was very much like well, I'm just gonna do this because people keep inviting me to do these things. But then it slowly begun to become clear that I was sort of delivering a message of, one, empowering your insecurities. All of us have some sort of vulnerability, and it holds us back in some way. But what would our lives be if we faced those fears head on? The other thing that I think my talks really got through to people in was that, I was teaching people how to truly engage empathy in a very actionable way. So because it is occasionally difficult to hear me speak, it's occasionally difficult to, understand the words that I am saying, people really did have to pay much more attention. They had to listen really, really hard, right? And they had to put down all of their sort of distractions and really put all of their energy into hearing me. And that act right there was what taught people how to, get into the correct empathy mindset, right? Empathy as a noun is an idea. It is intangible. It doesn't have any real meaning until you give it, some sort of definition in your day-to-day experiences. And because I was stuttering and I was forcing people to sort of face their own insecurities and forcing them to invest energy into hearing me speak, I was able to teach audiences how to turn empathy into a verb, into a choice. So again, empathy as a noun is an idea, but empathy as a verb is a choice. And it's a choice that you have to make every single day. And it's also a great choice to make, especially when you are at work or when you are trying to be more vulnerable. So I've called this talk Making Empathy Actionable, and we are going to get there, I promise. But I want to take a moment to talk about vulnerability as a performance factor, because you can't talk about being empathy and engaging in empathy behaviors until you talk about being a more vulnerable person just in general. And so here's where I'm going to talk a little bit more about just one particular experience I had in my career. So this is a screenshot from one of my LinkedIn learning courses, Communicating with Empathy. This course has something like 600,000 views, right? It's been incredibly, incredibly successful, and the entire team that worked on this course, all of us are very proud, right? And so I see this and I think, wow, that looks so professional, it's so well done, and we did very, very good work. But the process to get here was hell, basically. So when you're working with LinkedIn and creating visual content, they fly you out to their studios, and they're in Carpinteria, California. It's only a couple of hours away from here, actually. It's about an hour and 10 minutes north of LA. And so it's on this amazing coastal town. It's very beachy, very rich. You feel like you're a very important person when you're there. They built this entire studio just for me, just for my course. Again, all of that stuff was not a thing until they brought me on to do a course. They hired a professional makeup artist to make me feel as comfortable and confident as humanly possible on camera. Y'all, I felt like Beyonce, okay? This was my Renaissance era, and I was about to kill this shit. Absolutely. Don't clap yet, didn't happen. And then I saw this. So for those of you that do not know what this is a teleprompter. So how this works is, there's a camera behind there, and you read your scripts, and you're, like reading in the camera. It's great. Unless you are a person who stutters, right? So because I was a stutterer, I was always avoiding having to read out loud. Because I can't change words, right? Like everything on that page is exactly how it's supposed to be said. So all through school, I would dread having to read out loud, like how when you are, in class and you all have to read a paragraph and you go desk by desk, I would be there counting the paragraphs and going over every single word in the paragraph and saying like, okay, like I'm gonna be okay on that one, probably not that one should be okay, that one, oh, we'll see. And so, I always was very afraid of having to read out loud. So when I signed this contract with them, they were like, hey, we're going to, have your scripts on a teleprompter. Is that going to be okay? And I said, yes, absolutely. Did I believe that? For sure. Should I have? Hell no. I was delusional. I was just so excited that this big, massive, important company thought that my work was valuable enough to put it on their platform. So I would have done anything. I would have done anything to make this happen. So I create the content, I write the scripts, I get there, and on day one, we're all just sort of getting comfortable with each other. This is a camera, these are lights, this is a director, this is Sharon, like, how's it going? Are you feeling? I'm like, I'm great, this is amazing, oh my God. And then on day two is when we actually begin to do like the real sort of hardcore, like you need to read these scripts because this is a multi-billion-dollar national corporation, like you need to do your job. And I was going through these scripts and it was terrible. I was stuttering on every syllable of every word. It was one of the more demoralizing experiences of my life. And so in the beginning, this entire team was like, your scripts are amazing. You should turn this into a book and it's gonna make you millions of dollars. You're Beyonce. Like it was amazing. Like they were so excited. But by the end of day two, I was doing so horribly and I was so not fluent that it was just like, well, maybe we could try like an interview style, or like maybe we could find another author to like read your scripts, but like it would be your course still. And so I leave the studio at the end of day 2, and I went to grab some dinner. And so I'm at, this dinner place. It's happy hour, so it's packed, right? I am so upset. This is so embarrassing that I was crying. And not just like a couple of tears. I was like queer eye crying. You've seen those episodes. They destroyed me, every single one of them. I was in a restaurant in happy hour, packed restaurant, sobbing on the phone with my husband. I was crying so hard that the server was actively avoiding me. Do you know how bad it has to be that a server who works for tips is avoiding you? It was terrible. And I was just like, I am a failure because I can't succeed in this environment, right? So I go back to the hotel and crying more, and I'm thinking like, I'm gonna have to give them the advance back, which is extra bad because I already spent it. So what am I gonna do? They're gonna sue me. It was a mess. I was a mess. So I woke up on day 3, and I was like, I have to go back and do this. This is horrible. But as I was going to the studio, it kind of dawned on me, like, okay, the way that this has been done in the past obviously isn't gonna work for me. So how can I be successful in order to make the team successful, So I get there and I say, hey, can I be in the room by myself, right? So they had to redo their entire setup, right? They had to take out the director, they had to take out the producer. It was just me and the camera. And I was able to read the scripts with enough fluency to where they could, have the product on their website. I like to tell this story because it really goes back to, one, having empathy, right? I understood that the product I was giving them was not up to par, but they also understood that I was sort of a special circumstance, right? And we both understood that we had to do this thing in a way that hadn't really been done before. So I had to be openly vulnerable. I had to say, hey, look, this doesn't work for me, right? Just because all of the other thousands of authors that you have, done this work with have been able to do this content in this way, it doesn't mean that's going to work for me. So as a team, we really came together and decided, okay, how can we be successful and also make you feel comfortable enough to create a product that we can actually put on our site. And it was because of that vulnerability as well as that empathy that we were able to, have this happen. Absolutely. So vulnerability at work. I really want to stress this here because it's important to share your experiences, right? It's important to tell people, like, just because a thing has been done one way for all of these years and for all of these people, it doesn't mean that that's going to be good for me. And it's important for you as the listener to say, hey, that's okay, right? It's okay if we do things a little bit differently. And it's okay to share your emotions. I think that we spend a lot of time trying to be incredibly tough and incredibly like, no, I'm fine, everything's fine. But it's okay to not be okay. And it's okay to tell people that as well. So how do you be more vulnerable at work? Well, you have to trust other people. We talked about, like earlier, how trust is, one of the most important factors of truly being empathetic at work. Well, if there's a culture of trust, there's going to be an automatic culture of inclusion, right? People are going to feel more comfortable and confident communicating, and they're going to be better collaborators as a result. Again here, if you are allowing other people to be vulnerable, there has to be an environment of safety, and you also have to, have an inclusive culture. I mean, everything kind of comes back to inclusion if you think about it. And individuals need to be able to say the things that they need to say and to be able to ask for what they want. Again, just because something has been done one way for all of this time, it doesn't mean that's the only way that a thing can or should be done. So we've talked about what empathy is, why empathy is important, and how that relates to vulnerability. But now let's talk about how to turn empathy into a real behavior, right? Let's talk about making empathy actionable. So your key empathy behaviors, right? This is a system I created that helps people break down how to truly engage in empathy behaviors in order to create more empathetic cultures, right? It's the core components required to get into the empathy mindset. And it's also going to be your specific process to make empathy truly actionable on your team. So what are the key empathy behaviors? They are patience, perspective, and connection. Now, all of these things, I know they don't seem like actual behaviors currently, but they are all things that should be considered active parts of your existence. So let's begin with patience, right? So by patience, I mean to actually be present, right? Be aware of what's going on in the space around you. I think we live in a world where we're constantly bombarded with so much content, so much information. There's a 24-hour news cycle on about 35,000 different channels. We have like 150 different social media platforms, like 100 of them are Twitter, essentially now. And so we're constantly, there's emails, there's text messages, there's phone calls, there's so many things that we are constantly engaging in that it's really hard to be present in the moment that's right in front of us. So you have to just stop, right? And just focus on what is going on right in front of you. And I know that you know this, but we don't really ever talk about this, right? And we definitely don't do it all that much. So if you have a hard time really paying attention to what's going on in front of you or just being in your current circumstance, I want you to really remember the why, right? It's very easy to sort of get off track in these conversations and forget why we're having that conversation in the first place. So if you keep the why at the center of your interaction, it's going to be a lot easier to sort of keep your attention on the task at hand. So I want you to view patience as a practice, right? So how do you practice patience? The first thing you want to do is acknowledge your biases, okay? We are all biased, every single last one of us. And that's 100% okay. It actually makes us human. The problem is when we use those biases as a way to sort of, to tear other people down, right? Is when we weaponize those biases against entire groups of people. I think a part of the reason why unconscious bias training does not work most of the time is because there isn't a lot of acknowledging that you are biased and that it's okay, but we still have to talk about these things, right? So when we acknowledge our biases, it's the first steps of really combating them and minimizing them, right? I'm biased. I have a lot of things that make me a biased person. I'm from the Midwest. that makes me biased. I'm Black, I'm a woman, I'm tall. I have so many things that make me a biased person. If I keep those things in the forefront, I'm going to be better able to sort of push them to the side when I'm hearing another person's perspective. And then another way to practice patience is to really pay attention to what's going on around you and to what a person is saying to you. Oftentimes, we approach conversations by, us talking and saying words, and then waiting for our turn to talk again. We aren't really hearing other people. So I want you to practice listening to the words other people are saying and really hearing all of the things that they have to say. So the second key empathy behavior is perspective, right? And this is a good time when I like to tell my clients, you don't know everything. You don't have context for why people are behaving the way that they are behaving, right? People could be going through something incredibly difficult at home. They could have a sick child, a sick parent. They could be sick. They could have had a bad commute, right? You don't know everything that's going on in a person's life. So it's a better thing if you don't take everything as personally as you want to. And it's also really important to think before you speak. A lot of the times we don't hear what people say, we hear our opinions of what people are saying. So when you are, hearing a person and you're really listening to them, before you respond, try repeating what they said to you back to them. This is going to give you clarity. And again, it's going to help you sort of keep those biases a little bit down so you can, better see where they are coming from and understand their experiences. So how do you pursue perspective, right? So this is how you are going to turn perspective into a behavior. Again, we are making empathy actionable. Well, you want to examine your assumptions. Because we are all biased, we are going to have assumptions based on those biases. So I want you to really ask yourself where these assumptions are coming from. Why do I feel this way? Do I have, hard evidence of this being true? There is going to be a gap between the things that you assume and the things that are actually true. So you are going to want to try to address that gap. You know what I mean? So, do the best that you can to really, address that gap and to bring it a little bit closer together. That is how you pursue perspective. And then the final key empathy behavior is connection. Every interaction is going to be its own entity, right? Every time you talk to a person, it's going to be an evolution of your relationship, and it's also going to, build on where you have already come from and connect to where you are going with this person. So it's very important to speak with intention first and for impact second. When you speak with intention, you are keeping the, important parts of the conversation at the beginning. You are thinking about the why. You are thinking about the facts. And when you are speaking for impact, you are trying to elicit a more emotional response. So it's important, as you are connecting with people, to keep the intention aspect of it first and then the impact second. And I always like to say that this is the beginning, right? Every interaction you have with a person is going to build upon this already existing relationship. So every time you talk, it's another opportunity to further the connection that you are already building with a person. So how do you turn connection into a behavior? How do you connect with others? Well, a great way to do this is to ask questions, right? Ask about people. Try to learn about them. Try to better understand their perspective and their experiences, right? So you want to ask specific questions for feedback, right? Like, have I made you comfortable in this conversation? Have I made you uncomfortable in this conversation? Did you feel heard? How can I make you feel a little bit more heard, right? And then you want to ask open-ended questions for greater understanding. And here's where you are going into the, how questions, right? How can I make you feel more comfortable? How can I make you feel heard? And you're also going to go into the why questions. Why did you feel uncomfortable? Why do you feel this way about blank? And, here's where I like to sort of explain that connection and empathy is really a step beyond just sympathy. I think a lot of people confuse sympathy and empathy, right? Sympathy is a passive emotion. It is, I feel bad for this person, right? And that's it. But with empathy, you are being active. It's, I feel bad for this person, and I want to understand why they feel this way. I want to better understand, where this pain is coming from. And if you want to take it a step beyond empathy, there is compassion. Compassion is when you are acting on that, need to better understand what this person is trying to say to you, right? So sympathy is, I feel bad for this person. Empathy is, I feel bad and I want to understand. Compassion is, I feel bad, I want to understand. How can I help you be better? How can I help you feel better? How can I better connect with you? So to close this out, and I know this is a horrible graphic, I am not a dev, and secrets out, I don't know Ruby, very sorry. When you were thinking about these key empathy behaviors and making empathy actionable, this is a process that is going to continue on, right? You are going to approach every interaction from a place of patience. You are going to hear what everybody has to say. You are going to pay attention to people. You are going to give them all of your focus as well as your energy. You are going to constantly pursue perspective, right? To better understand where people are coming from. And then you want to continue to try to connect with people as often and frequently as you possibly can. And that connection is going to go back to being patient, right? So, if you are trying to make empathy actionable, you want to, constantly practice these three things. You want to be patient, you want to pursue perspective, and you want to continue to connect with others as a way to drive inclusion, improve communication, and be more collaborative with empathy. So that's all I have today. This is my contact information. I have a website where you can see all of the work that I do. I also have a LinkedIn newsletter. It's called Lead with Vulnerability, where we talk about different things like how to, just bring your humanity to work. And I also give a 5-minute keynote a few times a month just to give people a little bit of a taste of how I speak. So thank you so much for having me, and I will be around for the next day or two, so come over and say hi.